The Spinoff Podcast Network. Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spinoff. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
The Fold is brought to you by oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Kia ora and welcome to the second lock-in episode of The Fold, and maybe the sixth overall. Numbers don't mean anything anymore. Sorry for missing April. This was originally intended to be in April, but yeah, time defeated me. My guest today is Bailey Mackey. So he's outside of what has been the beat of this to this point, which has been interviewing people from the news side of the media. Bailey runs Pango Productions, which is a production house, so it's more on the screen production side of things, but they are... Look, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I think any media geeks will too. We talk about a bunch of things, including sort of how you sell shows internationally, from formats to kind of individual packages. He tells a very, very funny story about having about 1.5 hours sleep after a massive night out. And pitching a show in the US. He also has just essentially infinite wisdom, which comes from the career that he's had. He started at Te Karere in, I think, about 2001. They were advertising a single reporting role. He hitchhiked up there, borrowed a suit that didn't fit, went in, and on his way into his audition as a young Julian Wilcox, who is basically like a broadcaster made in a lab, and immediately knew that he didn't have the job. But it's the immense credit of the then Te Karere crew that they hired him and Julian rather than just one of them, and they both gone on to extraordinary careers in journalism. Bailey's has been, even though he's done a bunch of front of camera stuff, it's very much been more on the production and now sort of, running the whole ship side of things. He's worked under Julie Christie. He was hired away from Te Karere by Mel Reid to work at 3. He's made sports shows. He made the GC. He's basically had this just an extraordinary career in television, and he's only just sort of in his early 40s. And he is clearly just on, I think he's about to go through another kind of major uptick. He's one of the very fortunate people who this, the COVID-19 era represents opportunity to him. That's in part because he has spent the last 10 years just learning the ways of the industry in a way which I think is really, really instructive, and that a lot of people could learn from watching from him, from the way he's gone about learning. I think, as he says, he's a real people person, a real people watcher. He's very engaging, but he has done the schlepping, taken the big risk, gone to LA, gone to MIPCOM in Cannes, sold formats, met people, listened to them, learned from them, and he essentially has, I think, like a lifetime's worth of TV wisdom and accumulated knowledge, but he's fortunate enough to have it in still what is still, at worst, the midpoint of his career. And now all those contacts are extraordinarily useful, more so even than normal, because New Zealand is about to go, in all likelihood to level 2, and in which case we'll be able to make television here in a way that's unimaginable in other parts of the world. And Bailey has both the experience and the contacts to leverage that. And that is part of the thing that will, hopefully avert the worst of the recession that's coming and pull us out of it. So we talk about all that stuff and about the low culture side of reality TV, or the stigma attached to it, about the way that we fund television in this country, about Māori media, the challenge it faces, the immense opportunities of it. It's a really, really fun and hopefully interesting chat, and about, with someone who, to my mind, we should consider in the same realm as the likes of Taika Waititi and Lord and Peter Jackson. Maybe he's not as prominent, but he's certainly he's sort of as connected and has as much to give as those people. And, I think that in the next few years, next few months maybe, everything's moving so fast now, we're going to start to see a lot more of that. Anyway, that's enough from me. Let's just drop right into this episode of The Fold with Bailey Mackey. Kia ora, Bailey. How are you?
Hey, good, thanks, Duncan. Good, bro.
Thank you so much for making the time to join me on the Fold.
What else is there to do? We're in lockdown.
It's true. I should really be trying to get hold of a lot more busy people at the moment, because it's that combination of working like a lot, but also having kind of weird like permanent availability, eh?
Dude, it's weird because you find yourself on calls on Sunday night or Saturday morning and things like that, because there is no sort of sense of time or kind of daily duty kind of thing. So everything, you're available 24/7, and which makes it kind of worse in some ways for people like us.
Yeah, absolutely. There are no weekends, there are no evenings, there's no time. There's just lockdown, and it's
just lockdown.
Just lockdown. So I've been meaning to get Bailey on the phone on the Fold for a while, but then last week we were both on a Zoom kind of panel conference thing. It was put together. It was by the, I think, Directors and Editors Guild of New Zealand to discuss a draft screen sector review. This massive piece of work. It was like a 50-page document and a 90-minute Zoom. And I have to say, it was an interesting chat, but the whole time I was like, I just want to hear what Bailey's got to say. And so that's why I've organised this. And rather than run through your bio, which you could easily do a couple of hours on or more, I'm going to strongly recommend that people look up Julian Wilcox's Indigenous 100 podcast, which he did late last year, and it was so illuminating about your time growing up in and around Gisborne, and just I guess your path to this point. And it's a real good yarn, and I liked how was it the Māori Ken doll that you called it?
Yeah, that's definitely Jules. Jeez. He come out of the box ready to roll. I've never seen anybody, probably the most accomplished broadcaster I've ever worked with. And I've worked with a few, but he started like that, which was the scary thing. There was no kind of easing in process for Jules. It was just like he was ready to roll.
Yeah, it was just this amazing contrast. You got to listen to it; it's so good. But Bailey tells a story about starting at Te Karere, going up for his interview, borrowing a suit that's multiple sizes too small, and rocking in, and there's Julian Wilcox, but just absolutely gleaming the way he has throughout his career, and you really get a sense of that moment.
Every bit of hair was in place, and I remember thinking, "Stuff this guy." Look, I guess I'm glad that somebody had the foresight to hire both of us that day, and kind of set us loose on our journeys. So,
yeah, it's amazing how important shows like Te Karere are in terms of career. The number of people who've been through there, and you sort of think without that as an institution, how different New Zealand's media and screen sector would be, because they need to be able to, there's the ones that you hire straight out of the box like Julian, but then there's also the, guys like you hitched up from
rough as guts.
But got something, Well,
I think the other part of that too was pre kind of Māori TV, pre the real sort of advent of digital age, and there was only like us and a couple of Māori on my time, and the odd Māori on Shortland Street that were actually on TV. So those were different times.
And so like I say, I would love to talk about that the whole time, but it is there. This podcast, the Indigenous 100, is fantastic. So look that up. But I want to just basically parachute it right into this moment, because you run Pango. You've got a million jobs, and we'll get to some of those. But you've been like making television through your production company for at least 10 years now. Is that right?
Yeah. No, Pango's only been going, I think we're probably into like 5.5 years now. So pretty crazy to think we've done what we've done in that time. But yeah, 5.5 years. And then prior to that, I was with Black Ink, which was the company that I sold to iWorks, that sold to Warner Brothers.
That's right. Yeah. But, at the very least, like that's a long spell and a crucial spell to have watched how it evolves. Do you want to just describe to me the mood in the industry, both within and without of New Zealand right now, just staring down these incredibly constrained circumstances, both financially and creatively, really?
Look, I think there are definitely two parts to the industry. One is that I think a part of the sector is in survive mode. And then I think there's a small part which is in the thrive mode. I'm a big believer that kind of at the heart of all great creativity is there's a level of friction, whether it's in a story and friction between characters and things like that, or even friction in a creative process, that old adage of, friction makes diamonds kind of thing. So for me, I kind of exist at the moment, probably 1/4 in the survive sort of paradigm, and then 3/4 in the thrive category, because the reality is I'm keen to get out of lockdown, but actually just look, I think it's posed a lot of really good questions about where we're headed as a company. In terms of the sector, as I said, I think that's the kind of two sort of ways that people are looking at it. I was talking to my agent 2 days ago, and he was telling me that, look, buyers are buying, and so we shouldn't stop creating, we shouldn't stop pitching ideas and things like that. So look, I think there is a great part of the sector though that is fearful, and I think we got a sense for that on the sort of call we were on last week in the forum that we were part of, Duncan, and there's a real trepidation, but for me, I guess, everything I do, I kind of see through my lens and where we're at, and I definitely think it's thrive time, really.
That's cool. And because I sort of, when I think about New Zealand and its screen sector, particularly over the next couple of years, if you look at everything through the lens of what's going to be possible overseas in terms of scale productions and the amount of time and money that goes into these things, it's kind of hard to imagine it happening, except under very strange circumstances in a lot of other places in the world that make shows. Are you, but just because of the reality of getting anywhere from dozens to hundreds of people all in one place, insulated from the rest of society, to be able to make television, which is complex. And so you've got this amazing demand through a lot of people being at home, and they're going to be going in and out of lockdown for at least the rest of the year, if not longer. But the pipe's emptying. So, is this being seen as an opportunity for New Zealand to be a place that can make things?
Yeah. So the simple answer is yes. I talked with a UK producer network last week about them wanting to do a series down here, send their presenter down, put them in 2 weeks of quarantine. I mean, the big part of it is unscripted, which is kind of the area of my speciality, which is documentary, reality, entertainment, lifestyle, those types of genres. It'll be golden times. Well, it is golden times, I think, for our sector, because as you saw in the writers' strike that happened in the early 2000s in Hollywood, which kind of born the great sort of reality age, if you like, or the great unscripted age, because of the turnaround time on scripted. People have all these thirsty real estate in terms of platforms, whether they're OTT streaming or linear or cable, and they all need filling. So unscripted is really a lot quicker to turn around. So I don't know, though, that the New Zealand sector is as coordinated in the unscripted side as it sort of tends to be on the scripted side. I know that mainly a lot of the levers that we have available as a sector get used in regards to scripted. So I think that we do need cohesion on the unscripted side. I mean, we our company, we go to the markets, we have agency representation, we're in LA a lot. I mean, all of that has changed a bit, but what's interesting, changed a bit through COVID. What's interesting, though, is that, and I don't know about you, but it's weird because you're having Zoom conversations, or you're talking to clients, or you're talking to buyers, and you have your agent and that. There's also a level of intimacy in terms of talking to that really powerful person in their spare bedroom. And it's kind of weird because you're like, oh, those are pretty cool curtains. And you actually get into a level of kind of detail and understanding of that person. And, their young child might be running around in the background, and you kind of start to realize how human everyone is and things like that. So look, again, I don't want to sound like I'm representative of the sector in saying this, but I do know that for us, it's definitely thrive time, and we're really putting kind of the gas on, if you like.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's so true what you say about the leveling effect of this, because normally when you go into those big rooms, and I haven't been into many of them myself, but even if we're going to pitch on like a big corporate client, you can be sort of conscious of where you're coming from and the scale of the relative scale of your organizations. Yeah. But when everyone is in their bedroom and everyone's kids are running in and out, it feels like the power of the idea or of your connection matters more than the sort of all of this other stuff we wrap around business that helps keep people in their boxes. So the level of dynamism in this environment, the ceiling and the floor feels a lot more in play.
I'm feeling that right now, Duncan, looking at your mirror and your blinds there, thinking, geez, those are cool blinds. Wonder where Duncan got them from. but I guess that's it, right? And, it's interesting when you meet people. Like, I'm a massive people watcher, and I always think, I'm like, oh wow, what does that person do in their spare time? Or, are they vegan? Are they like, would they have an Americano? Would they be a flat white person? So I'm fascinated by that, and so actually you're getting to know people a lot better, and I think there's a real intimacy. To Zoom and to Skype and to, Microsoft Teams and whatever we're using, that's been forced upon us. But again, just the way I see the world is that it's an opportunity, and I've been on some calls with some pretty, I guess, important people, and you're just like, wow, they're just like us, dealing with having to, play the Wiggles and cook dinner and have this really full-on kind of negotiation, creative and business. So,
it's funny what you said before about reality TV and it lacking a support structure here. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because there's been this aversion to funding reality TV in the same way. It's not like we haven't done it, but we sort of we need to give it this extra element, or like kind of find some other reason to justify it beyond its pure sort of entertainment, or, you know, and we act like it doesn't have a cultural value. And some of that is actually related to something that you were intimately involved in the GC, and the way that people reacted to that, wrongly, I think. And, you know, as a result, we're in this sort of strange bind where New Zealand actually has one of the most, you know, I think pound for pound, we're probably the most original creators of reality TV in the world on a per capita basis. We've got amazing infrastructure around it in companies like yours and Julie's. But because we have not either given it the cultural weight or sort of built the kind of government funded infrastructure around it, it's sort of a paradox. On one level, the industry is lean, and it knows exactly what it's doing, and it doesn't have, you know, it doesn't require anyone else's blessing to go out and get to work. But also, we don't have that kind of, we don't have a sort of unscripted sector board. We don't have all these guilds that go out and advocate for us in a way that right now, you know, we should be screaming to get productions down here. Like, what do you think about the sort of stigma around reality?
Oh, 100%. Look, the reality of reality is, I think a big determinant is whether you view culture with a big C or a little c. And I was brought up in an environment, and I guess this is kind of where I've always gained strength from, because I was brought up in what you would suggest a pretty traditional Māori environment. My grandparents' first language was Māori. Our first language in our home was Māori. I'm a fluent speaker of Māori, brought up on the East Coast. So I guess that's, you know, an upbringing that you would suggest would be from the culture with a big C. But from a really young age, I was always a massive consumer of pop culture. My grandmother used to love, rest her soul, she used to love, you know, Falcon Crest and Dynasty and all these programs. And I used to, like, by osmosis, get drawn into watching them, and Magnum PI and Dukes of Hazzard, dare I say it, with the Confederation flag on. But I guess we're just products of our time. And so despite this kind of, you know, upbringing, I was always a consumer of a lot of American and then British programming. I find, look, I'm just up for the debate on that, Duncan, about its place in our sort of cultural infrastructure, if you like, because whether or not, you know, people believe it is or not, it shouldn't impact somebody's right to tell that story or to use that medium to tell that story. And, you know, you talked about the GC. What's interesting is, construct-wise, there's very little difference between the GC and the Casketeers. Now, the Casketeers is one of my favourite shows ever, beautifully made, but actually construct-wise, it's still constructed reality, because, you know, you still go in and, well, the Tipanes are sort of undertaking their daily activities. There's still a camera crew there, and they're still, like, you know, pre-thought put into what they're doing. And can you do this? Can you tell us, you know, can we get some shots of you with your leaf blower? And things like that, which is largely the same as the GC. And actually, even if you look at the definition of the documentary, it's the creative interpretation of reality. And so I guess there's a big difference between kind of constructed and heavily manipulated reality and kind of much more observational documentary. So I think, I don't even personally know where I sit on it, other than I just love the debate and love to be able to reserve somebody's right to be able to tell that. Generally, though, it's looked down upon. And I always laugh, you know. We were talking about Taika pre this call and how amazing it is that he's doing Star Wars. And I remember sitting at a dinner with him and a whole lot of studio executives one night, and they were all talking, and then about what their guilty pleasure was. And somebody said, "Oh, I hate to say this, but I really like this reality show. I can't even remember what it was." And then they all started ripping off on a reality show. And Taika looked at me, and I was like, "Oh, I make reality." And you could sort of see the table. And I was thinking, I sort of said, it's funny that, you're here making a fictional film about superheroes who wear their undies on the outside, and yet you look down on reality. That's not fair. But no, look, I think it's like anything, in a healthy, content consumer and consumption environment, we'd have everything. We'd have a bit of chocolate, and we'd have some healthy kale salad as well. So,
yeah, I just happen to think that reality. I mean, this whole podcast grew out of a previous podcast I did called The Real Pod, which was entirely about reality TV every week. So I don't think it's a debate. I think that we're right. It is culture, and I don't care whether the sea's up or down. And anyone who tries to suggest it's not is just, it's such an easily lost argument. And I think a lot of it, the time it comes down to, I mean, just as you said, that like the reality boom in the mid-2000s came out of the writers' strike. Some of them perceived it as almost like scab labor. It's writers and cultural people of a particular ilk and often a particular class, protecting a certain vision of culture. And there is a democracy about reality that says, are you kinetic on-screen talent? Can you have an amazing idea? Are you willing to force this thing through to its conclusion, to make it electric? And then you can make TV. It's kind of a punk television in many ways, and even down to the way it sort of wears its the commercial elements on the outside isn't embarrassed about them. I feel like it speaks to that, and I think New Zealand is actually, but at once, as I said before, it's a great maker of and deviser of reality TV, and from Sidewalk Karaoke on up and it is a place that still holds a really weirdly disdainful attitude towards it. And I think, to be honest, that there's going to become a time when we have to sort of really assess the integrity of that. And I think that time's coming soon, because historically, while we couldn't afford to fund premium drama, we could still afford to kind of commercially make, without New Zealand On Air funding, reality shows. Within our linear networks, that might not be true anymore. Do you think that the case will need to be made, that debate will need to be had in public a bit more?
Yeah, look, I think that there is two things. One is that post-COVID, all bets are off, I think. And the prevalence of multi-night big reality shows on linear TV will have to be a choice that, an agency like New Zealand On Air decides whether or not to, to move into that area. So I think the second part of that is around New Zealand's ability. What I would like to see is a heavier weighting, not so much to international formats, even though I've made some of those and will probably still make some of those in my career, but actually local intellectual property. As you said, I mean, the whole Idol craze came out of New Zealand, right? Pop Idol. So, we deserve our place in the pantheon of, the Hall of Famers, in regards to reality TV. Obviously, Julie, Christie, right through, look, I see some really cool stuff, and it's always an interesting argument, because what's Tiger King on Netflix? Is that reality, or is that observational documentary? Like, I just don't know. Like, that was one of the most insane things I've ever seen, and so it's always a tough argument. I agree with you, bro, that actually it doesn't matter whether it's up or lowercase c, that it is part of us, but I do think the time has come to reopen that debate. And maybe after this, I'll give Cameron Harland a call at New Zealand On Air, Duncan, and I'll say, I was talking to Duncan Greive, and him and I both believe.
Well, we might jump on a Zoom with him. That way we can sort of badger
That's
him.
Right, yeah.
Hey, so a lot of the work that you've done has been in Māori media, either on Māori TV or you currently produce Marae. What do you sort of see? And there's a big debate about both the level of funding that receives and how that interacts with the mainstream, and particularly in light of the bailout that's happened for the sort of mainstream media companies. What is your current diagnosis of the state of it and the role it plays, and where would you like to see it go?
Yeah. So, look, one of the things I guess this current government has done is came in and kind of probably, they had 9 years in the opposition benches, and coming in gave them an opportunity to reassess most things, and reimagine the world from their point of view. And so there's probably 3 or 4 big creative sector reviews, that have gone, that are underway. One of them's a Māori review. Look, I've been privy to some of that. Here's my simple summation, though, is that 95% of the screen sector's contribution in a Māori context is born out of Māori language. Now, I think that should remain the case, but I think on top of that, let's say that that government investment in that is $10. I'd say leave that $10 there, but what needs to increase would be another $10 that would be around Māori perspective, because I just don't think, and look, I've said this, I'm not saying this because I'm talking to you, but I've said this to Leone, I think Aotea should be supported because it really promotes a distinct Māori perspective on things. So Aotea, which is on the Spinoff, for those people that don't know. So we can't just be about the language, even though I'm a language supporter, big Te Reo supporter. I also think that we've got to pay respect to that Māori perspective. And you could say that it's a treaty, right, which I agree with, but you could also say other things about it in regards to just ensuring that there is a perspective. One of the things that we always talk about at Pango is, and our goal, our mission is to influence the world through Māori storytelling, right? So whether or not it be an explicitly Māori thing like Marae, or whether or not it be, we've got a new animation that comes out at the end of the month called The Exceptional Squad, which isn't overtly Māori, but we always like to think it's got a Māori heart. The interesting thing is we always say, what would we do to maths? So Married at First Sight, like what Māori sensibilities or what Māori worldview could we bring to something that seems so explicitly train wrecky, if that is a term, but how would we treat that? And I hope that is the bigger role that we are able to play in the media landscape. And would we like support for that? Yeah, we would. New Zealand On Air has, a small pot of money in regards to that, but I think I would definitely like to see that part of the sector increase. And
because that's obviously, I appreciate what you said about Aotea, and that was always the sort of mission. The kaupapa of it was to be within a sort of a more, mainstream site, but to just have it sitting there alongside everything else, and not have it siloed by time slot or buried somewhere. And I think that you do see amongst the more the sort of mainstream media in New Zealand, there is a greater sense of that. It felt like a real void for a while, and I'm not saying by any means that the Spinoff is alone in valuing that, but it sort of it strikes me as, yes, there is a treaty element to it, but before we started recording, you were talking about Taika and the extent to which he and his sensibility and his sort of sense of humour, which seems to be a very Māori sense of humour a lot of the time. I remember Dan Taipua wrote a fantastic piece about Thor Ragnarok, describing it as a very Māori Marvel movie. And that sort of kind of characterizes the way that he is almost like infecting Hollywood with his sense of humor and his sensibility. And you look at that and you go, well, this isn't just like a sort of a true thing. It's the business opportunity. And I think that's what Pango has proven as well, is like this idea of taking, often these shows start on Māori TV, but then the format is bought by Fremantle. You're having conversations in Hollywood and in Cannes because you've got something different. I remember on that Julian Wilcox pod, you talked about going into this meeting with your tamoko exposed and going, should I cover this up? Like, will who I am be a negative? And your agent saying, A, yes, it will, but B, the only people who'll buy will be the people who see it as a positive too. And I think that is we're a long way from anywhere. And even with the COVID-19 stuff, like what are our national advantages? And it seems like our landscape and the Māori perspective, that's it. They sit alongside one another, but we only really seem to lean hard into one when we're selling. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really good analysis of it, because I'm a big believer that the Māori dimension of what we of what we propose as a country is huge, and which I guess kind of supports what I said earlier about the perspective thing and really strengthening that part. I mean, I am yet, I think New Zealand On Air, New Zealand Film Commission all do a really good job, but actually kind of max out at a certain conversation level around it, because I think, the problem is and look, when you look at the sector and you look at those, because there's a sustainability element to that as well, Duncan, which is around who can constantly be badgering them about the importance of this, but more than that, putting in front of them projects that actually ask those valid questions. So I think you're right. It is landscape in Māori. But I also think though, and this is something else I said, you look at someone like Lord, she doesn't necessarily fit into either of those categories, and yet has, just blown up out of here in a way that I think, we may never see again. So where does she get accounted for in that kind of ecosystem as well?
Yeah, I agree. I think she's an extraordinary talent, and yet while she's a very singular talent, she also seems to be very much a function of New Zealand's creative ecosystem, which we have historically used and we are aware of, but I don't think we sell it particularly well. Like she came out of the fact that she sort of was discovered at a particular, or made herself discoverable at a particular age, and had the tenacity to keep going around through various writing partners until she found one that she clicked with, but then recorded these like a number one single at like a makeshift studio in an Art Deco building a kilometre away from where I stand, where I sit right now. And the very fact of having both that level of ambition, but the almost folksy way that it came about, that's not really imaginable in many places. But New Zealand, from whether it's Peter Jackson or Taika self-funding his films, you think of any number of different sort of, the number of William Waiwort or like web series, kind of like people who've just made themselves into something more than you would think from the parts around them, just a kind of a level of creative ingenuity that exists here.
I think that's right. But could I just add a little part to that conversation, Duncan, which is, I think it's Peter Jackson who said, New Zealanders, we see things early. And I don't know whether that's down to kind of our roots, the number 8 wire, even though I'm not that keen on that analogy, but the idea that we do have to kind of, I guess use what we got. The other part of what Peter Jackson said is we do see things early as New Zealanders, but we're usually a buck short and a day late. So, you know, when you look at successes like Peter Jackson and like Lord and like Taika and Paris Goebel, they're probably, they saw things early, but we're a day early, you know, so a day early rather than a day late. So
it's true, and it is the fact of having the conviction and will and drive to get there. You know, that is often, you know, like, I think we're ideas rich. We're not necessarily execution rich, even
right.
though we have more of the tools around.
I'm actually on another sector panel this afternoon. I'm going to use that, Duncan. That's actually good. We are ideas rich, and we're just not execution ready, and that has an element of market fit to it, and the idea that, you know, we are 12 hours away by plane from kind of the biggest commercial market in the world, which is obviously the US in regards to content. So I think that's always been an inhibitor for many people. But I was like, I love going to LA and mixing it up. I don't like staying for a long time because, you know, it's like a triage ward of ex-Shortland Street actors up there, Kiwi actors, you know, like in terms of, and look, they're all my mates and we hang out, but everyone's waiting in that city. You're waiting for a callback, or you're waiting for your next audition, or you're waiting for a green light from a network, and I just can't stand the waiting. But I do love going up there, and I love going up there because I always have this analogy that once you get there, just a piece of chewing gum on somebody's shoe. And actually that's a really cool position to be in, because it just, you know, it kind of increases the fight, and it just makes you really kind of grateful that you come from an amazing country, and you kind of have all this depth behind you. And I think I may have said that in that other podcast, which is, I've always been a big believer, as soon as you can get the execution part, what we have as Māori is we just have this whakapapa, this creative whakapapa that is, I think, as good as anywhere in the world. And really, you know, I'm sitting in, you know, meetings, or you're sitting in environments where everybody is as good as it could be in terms of execution. And once you gain those skills, you're able to compete at that level in terms of the conversation. But then you just have this whole other dimension and realm that you can add to the mix.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I sort of love that. It's funny, I feel like in our industry, people look down at times. I think out of a defense mechanism on sales and on that whole end of things. And I know that you love it.
Love it.
It's a special feeling, right? Like you just getting into a room, being confident, and just being able to control that. I mean, obviously you've done it on a level which I can't even imagine, but I've after hating the process and being almost trained to, I've come to love it. And I feel like more of us should not look down on sales or have this kind of cultural contempt for it, but see it for how important it is for everything, whether you're selling yourself to an employer, to whether you're selling production to Hollywood. It's a skill and it matters.
Yeah. Look, we just underappreciate the art of pitching here in New Zealand, because New Zealanders don't like people who talk about themselves. So I guess sales is often equated to people who talk about themselves. And, you know, there's that old Māori saying that kare te kumere kōrero mo tōna reka. The kumera doesn't talk about its own sweetness. So I guess, you know, from a cultural context, you're also dealing with that. But my view is this, is that effectively pitching or sales is the ignition key turning. You know, without that, you know, the car doesn't move. So you got to get that right. And I've been told I'm a really good and strong pitcher. But mine is just more about connection. I love what I'm into, and if I'm passionate about it, then I want to tell you about it, and I want people in the room to buy into it and buy into that energy. So, but it is relationship focused. I mean, my agent is always like, dude, he was like, man, you're so good in a room, and everyone wants to, like, you know, do business with you, and I think that is a lot down to. Look, I think everyone likes passion and enthusiasm and when you know, also hopefully know what you're talking about, and then you start to put a few things together and you have a track record and things like that, then I think that makes you a much more different proposition. I've got a really quick story I'd love to tell though, Duncan, on how bad a bad pitch. I flew to Washington once, to Washington, DC. I flew all the way from New Zealand, and I had a show called The Game Chef, which ended up making it to air, and we sold to National Geographic, but went to a pitch. I flew all the way to Washington, and I think I arrived at like 10 a.m. in the morning. I went to the gym, and had a really healthy lunch, and then my pitch was 9 a.m. the next morning, and I was like, man, I feel so good. So then I go and do what every self-respecting Kiwi does, and go and get drunk. And and I started at about 3 in the morning. Thought I'll just have a couple of beers at a pub. Then I bumped into a couple of Aussies, and then they knew some Kiwis, and then oh man, then we were singing like Tu Tera Mai Ngā Iwi at someone's apartment in Washington DC at about 4 in the morning. And I ended up going to this pitch, and I'd had about an hour and a half sleep. I was reeking of alcohol, and I got there, and I was talking about pitches because I think I need to level the field a bit by saying how bad sometimes it can go. And I pitched this show about Game Chef, and it was effectively involved this Italian Greek restaurateur who would hunt with a bow and arrow on the set of Lord of the Rings down in Wanaka, Queenstown. And I sort of went in and pitched the lights out, took all the oxygen out of the room, and was pitching for about 15, 20 minutes, not one word. And I was talking about how he was a hunter and he could do all these things with a knife and things like that. And the guy from National Geographic was like, you know, we're a conservation channel. And I was just like, oh. So, look, you don't always get it right. And which is probably a lesson. And I should have done a bit more research on that. What's weird, though, is that National Geographic ended up buying it as an acquisition later in certain parts of the world. So
that's incredible. Yeah. I mean, because it's funny, like I've talked to Phil Smith and a few other people in the industry about CAN and MIPCOM and these, just because that level of the process, it's so far from anything I've ever seen, but it has this kind of mystique around it, and there's obviously this tiny handful of New Zealanders who go there regularly, who know what to do it. For those who haven't been there, do you want to describe those kind of scenes? So MIP TV and MIPCOM happen in April and October every year, and they're basically where the world's content buyers and sellers congregate to drink rosé, and eat panna chocolates, which I always got to go there in pretty reasonable shape because I come home terrible. But look, that's effectively what it is. I've been there probably about 15 times. I mean, Phil Smith, those types of people, John Barnett, Julie Christie, 30s, 40s, 30 or 40 times they've been. And
have you been, Duncan? Because I'd suggest I tell everybody, and I say I tell all my mates, just make it to Cairn and sleep on my couch. Like, don't worry about accommodation, because everybody see like it's a massive expense, and you know, that's where I think we could use with support, you know, helping first timers there. And I remember the first time I went, I walked into the Palais and there's like 20,000 people and every show in the world is there. It was the one where they launched X Factor, and Simon Cowell was on a yacht outside the Palais and was presenting via satellite into everyone that was in this auditorium about this show's going to be the biggest thing. You know, the Game of Thrones are released there. Everything's released there. And I just remember being so overwhelmed at lunchtime. I went back to my room, shut the curtains and just lay on my bed and was like, oh man, I'm shit. And you know, what am I doing here? And why would anyone want to buy anything from me? And then the next time you go, you're less overwhelmed. And then the time after that, you're like, these guys' ideas are just as shit as mine. And you end up like in a position where you're like, well, actually, I think I got this. And then I remember the one where I noticed the tide changing from just, being on the fringes to actually having real conversations with real buyers and things like that. And it's a real cool time. And now I go and I've got really good mates. And a lot of it's business is done on those relationships that I have now. So it's cool. I'd encourage anyone. My couch is available. If we ever get the opportunity to go back, there's a long list of illustrious New Zealanders that have slept on that couch. I can tell you now, Duncan.
I'm keen. So I'm conscious that we're probably running out of time, but I wanted to bullet point through, because one other thing that you are, in addition to everything that we've already discussed, is someone who is on a shitload of boards. Is that correct? Could you just reel them off for us?
I'm on Ngāti Porou Group Holdings, which is the commercial arm of my iwi entity on the East Coast. I'm on the steering group of the New Zealand Pavilion for Dubai 2020, which has just been postponed to 2021, obviously because of COVID. I am on the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council, and alongside 12 other CEOs of New Zealand, including Fonterra, Bunnings, Westpac. I represent clearly the big end of town, Duncan, but not really. And last but not least, I'm just newly elected to New Zealand Rugby. So good, got my hands full.
Yeah, absolutely. There's three of those that I'm just super curious about, and that's no disrespect to the New Zealand Pavilion, because I'm sure that's super interesting too. But do you want to just talk about your role at I'll just sort of bullet point through them, but tell me about Ngāti Porou Holdings and how you sort of come with all of that experience, you can help kind of grow your iwi.
So look, if you have a look at the Māori economy, largely most of it is in the primary sector: farming, fishing, forestry, and horticulture, agriculture. So effectively, a lot of the times who ends up being on boards are people that are skilled in those areas, and including lawyers and accountants. I've long been a believer that we underestimate the soft skills in business, whether that be story, and for me that's storytelling. So I guess I bring that. I'm deeply connected to being Ngāti Porou. It's kind of the big driver of who I am. So and look, my lifelong goal is to improve the position of Māori life, Ngāti Porou life, and however I can do that is kind of what I'm about.
And because when I look at that sector, it feels like the most important one in New Zealand. It's certainly the most far-sighted in terms of the post-settlement iwi and how they grow them.
Totally.
Do you feel like there is enough, or like how can New Zealand, because it does feel like you say, there's the holdings tend to be in land or primary industries, and yet a lot of what we've talked about today in terms of where the kind of electric spark of Māori creativity lies is over in the kind of creative world and its related constituent industries. Do you think there is a case for or an ability to kind of merge the sort of capital and sightline of one with that sort of community over on the other?
That's a really interesting question, and I'd probably need to think about that a lot more. I mean, has iwi... Look, I probably think that by most people's account, the Māori economy, whether it be iwi, post-settlement or lands trust, tend to be quite conservative. And media, as you know, Duncan, is pretty volatile, both in the nature of business and the people inside it. So I guess we've got that usually mitigates, iwi participating in that realm. But I do think what I'd love to see is a better contribution from our sector within the Māori economy in terms of the importance of story, the importance of narrative, and because I think a lot of times we invest in the tangible. We don't invest in marketing. We don't invest in telling that story.
IP.
Yeah, and actually that's the part that's the most scalable. Because if you have a tree and it produces 50 apples, you can only ever get a return on those 50 apples. But if you have, if you invest in, what kind of tree that is, and the grafting of it in terms of, you might take Jazz, you might take Pacific Rose, you might take Braeburn, and put them together, you could sell that intellectual property millions of times. So I think that's something that we try to do, focus on the scalable part of what we do at Pango. So
that's me. And the briefly on the PM's business advisor, I saw that you got put on that, and I looked at the other names and I was like, man, that's going to be interesting conversations. How is that like? Do you feel like that's been useful and effective, or like and what kind of things have you experienced through that board?
So in regards to the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council, it's been amazing to be at the big table in regards to some of the issues that face us as a sector. And that included convening, a group of really thought leaders in terms of the Māori economy space, and putting up a paper which we've put up and which hopefully is incredibly transformative in regards to activating the Māori economy. It's probably really needed post-COVID. So, but more than that, again, Duncan, to go back to what I said earlier, my goal is to improve the position of Māori. So any fora where you're able to do that, I think is powerful. And I think, the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council has worked, because the other way is the impact that myself and Rachel Tolele, who's also on there, have is the impact that we have on those other businesses and the conversations that we have with them in regards to, I guess, a Māori perspective or a different way of doing things.
Yeah, we just published a piece from Rachel on the Spinoff talking about...
No, I read it. It was awesome. She's awesome.
She's amazing, eh?
She's a powerhouse, bro. She's a powerhouse.
So totally. You talk to her and you feel like you're learning things real quick. And then the last one happened or was announced in the past couple of weeks, and I reckon is the freakiest one. And I was like the most impressed and also like either scared for you or scared for them. But someone's going to have to change. Do you know what I mean? And that's New Zealand rugby.
Yeah.
So tell me about like both your interest in rugby and how you feel parachuting into that organisation as conservative and like part of a particular type of New Zealand as it is at this moment.
Yeah, well, I think it's because of this moment that kind of makes it, for me, therein lies the opportunity. If you think about it, like, it's probably the best time in rugby's history to kind of parachute in, as you said, because things have to change. Models have to change. We need new ways of thinking. But to be honest, I've had one board meeting and, man, it's a pretty progressive crew. Everybody's open-minded. It's not, kind of what you think it is. And there's some real big gnarly issues. But if you think about all of those things, Duncan, whether it be the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council, New Zealand Rugby, Dubai, the exhibition, the pavilion, even Ngāti Porou, they're actually all in the experience business of sorts, right? So, and in rugby, whether it's my 8-year-old son who plays the game to try and, get the bar of chocolate as player of the day and hang with his mates, or my dad who subscribes to Sky and buys merchandise, they're all experiences. And really, more and more now, I think that what we do is really we're just in the different parts of the experience business, and we and central to that is the customer. I'd love a better term than customer, because I don't think that's quite right when you think about kind of the relationship you have with an audience, or the relationship you have with a rugby goer, or the relationship you have with someone who is of Ngāti Porou descent. So and I don't think we always come from a customer-centric point of view. And, because I used to be big on, mate, I'll just make what I love and what I think. But more and more, where you hit that sweet spot is where you also consider what the audience may want in that. I don't think that means giving up on any of your values or attitudes, not at all. But I do think it helps you hone a certain amount of your execution ability when you do have a customer-centric view on things.
I totally agree, and I think that has historically been a problem for New Zealand rugby, in that it was a monopoly supplier of a very highly in-demand product, and that was its DNA, that it knew that it sort of defended certain kind of values and it put out a particular product, but people's ability to choose was limited. And then over the last 20 years or so, for everything from UFC to Twitch to Netflix has come up and has competed, especially for younger people. And I think they were very slow to realize that they had to suddenly become a customer-centric organization. And that is the opportunity that they have to figure out now. And that's what, I think you'll do a great job on that board there.
Well, and just on that, the game went professional in 1996. Largely the content proposition is the same, Friday night, Saturday night, but we now live in a 24/7 on demand, and we need survivability in the digital age. And there's a massive drop-off rate of boys at teenage level, you can't tell me that's not impacted by the fact we don't have strong digital presence. And I always use this example. My son will play under 8s and then go home and watch LeBron James and Giannis Antetokounmpo highlights videos, because there are hundreds of thousands of those, and there are only tens of Rico Ioane videos who he wants to watch, but he's watched them all. So many of those could be, that see the digitization of assets that New Zealand Rugby already owns. So I guess that's part of the big challenge, is that we got to remain relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I've taken up way too much of your time, but I so appreciate it, and I just the breadth of things that you're interested and knowledgeable about is kind of staggering and humbling. But it's been awesome to have you, Bailey, and hopefully we'll speak to you again soon, because I just feel like every 6 months you're going to have seen some things about the way this industry in the broader sense is going to evolve that are going to be worth checking in with.
No, and thanks for the kōrero, Duncan, and yeah, let's do this again sometime.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to O Media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spinoff Podcast Network.